There is a sound the world makes right before you black out. It's not a silence. It's a roar, like the ocean rushing in your ears, drowning out everything else. The lights get too bright, the floor feels like it's tilting, and for a terrifying second you are completely, utterly lost. That's what happened to me. My name is Lena, and on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a busy coffee shop, I collapsed. The last thing I remembered was the smell of roasted beans and steamed milk, the weight of a tray of dirty cups in my hands, the smile I had plastered on my face for the last 6 hours, a mask that was cracking under the sheer exhaustion of being hungry. Not just I missed lunch hungry. I'm talking about a deep, hollow, constant ache, the kind of hunger that makes your hands shake and your vision swim. I had been living this way for months, since my mom passed away. She was my whole world, a kind, gentle woman who worked herself to the bone but always had a smile for me. She never talked about her family. It was a locked door in her heart, and I never had the key. When she was gone, the door to our old life slammed shut forever. I was alone, with nowhere to go. I was sleeping in the back room of the library during the day and working double shifts at the coffee shop at night. I was a ghost, floating through a city that didn't see me. And then, on that Tuesday, my body decided it had had enough. The roar filled my ears. The bright lights of the cafe swirled into a blinding white. The tray crashed to the floor, and I crashed right after it. When I came to, I was on the cold, sticky tiles. My manager, Brenda, was kneeling over me, her face a mixture of concern and annoyance. "Lena, for heaven's sake, did you skip breakfast again?" I tried to speak, to apologize, but my words were a weak mumble. The other customers were staring, some with pity, some with irritation. I was a disruption in their daily routine, a problem. Brenda helped me to the back room, sat me on a crate. "Take 5 minutes," she said, her voice firm. "Then clean up that mess, and Lena, eat something." If only I had something to eat. I put my head in my hands, the shame a hot wave washing over me. This was rock bottom. This was the moment I truly understood what it meant to have nothing, and no one. But I was wrong, because when I finally dragged myself back out to the front to clean the broken cups, I saw it. Sitting on the counter, right by the register, was a simple brown paper bag, and written on the side, in neat, precise letters, was my name. Lena. I stared at that bag like it was a ghost. No one here knew my name. I was just the new girl. Brenda called me sweetheart. The customers didn't call me anything at all. My heart was pounding. Was this a joke? Some kind of cruel trick? Hesitantly, I reached for it and peered inside. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't much. An apple, a banana, a granola bar, a bottle of water, and a simple turkey sandwich. To most people, it was a light lunch. To me, it was a feast. It was a lifeline. But who? I looked around the cafe. The lunch rush was over. Only a few people remained, sipping their drinks, none of them looking my way. "Who left this?" I asked Brenda, my voice trembling. She shrugged, counting the cash in the register. "Some man, well-dressed. He asked if your name was Lena. I said yes. He bought a black coffee, left that for you, and walked out. Didn't say another word." A well-dressed man, a stranger. It made no sense. I took the bag into the back room and devoured the sandwich. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. Every bite was a relief, a slow return of strength to my trembling limbs. But with the hunger fatting, a new feeling took its place, a burning curiosity. Why? Why would a stranger do this? The next day I was on high alert. I watched every customer who walked in, and then just after noon I saw him. A tall, older man in a dark, expensive-looking coat. He moved with an air of quiet authority. He didn't look at the menu. He walked straight to the counter, his eyes finding me immediately. "A black coffee, please," he said. His voice was calm, deep. Then he slid a small, white envelope across the counter. It had my name on it, written in the same neat handwriting. Before I could say a word, before I could even process the coffee, he paid with a crisp bill, turned, and walked out. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. There was no letter, no note, just a single $100 bill. This wasn't charity, this was a message, but what was it saying? I made a decision in that moment. I couldn't live with this mystery. I needed answers. The next day, when he came in, I was ready. I poured his black coffee, but as I handed it to him, I met his eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "For the food. For this." I gestured to the envelope I'd received the day before. He gave a single, slow nod. "You're welcome, Lena." "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding something. Then he said, "I knew your mother." And with those 5 words, my world split open. He turned and walked away, but this time, I didn't let him go. I told Brenda I felt sick, which wasn't entirely a lie, and I ran out the door after him. I followed him at a distance, my heart hammering against my ribs. He walked 2 blocks and turned into a parking garage. A few minutes later, a sleek black car emerged. I did the only thing I could think of. I raised my hand and hailed a taxi, a reckless, crazy expense I couldn't afford. "Follow that car," I said, my voice shaking. The taxi driver, an older man with kind eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure, kid?" "Yes, please." And so I followed the trail of crumbs, through the busy city streets, into a neighborhood I had only ever seen in magazines. The houses got bigger, the lawns greener, the cars more expensive. Finally, the black car turned into a long, tree-lined driveway leading to a mansion that looked like a castle, a fortress of wealth and power. The taxi stopped at the bottom of the driveway. I paid him with $100 bill, my hands trembling. I got out and stared up at the house. And there, on the massive, wrought-iron gate, was a polished brass nameplate. Asterisk Harlow. My mother's maiden name. The door to the mansion opened, and the man in the coat stood there, waiting. He wasn't surprised to see me. He had been leading me here all along. "Welcome, Lena," he said. "I am Arthur Harlow, your grandfather." Walking into my grandfather's house was like stepping onto another planet. The floors were gleaming marble. The ceilings were so high they seemed to touch the sky. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. It was silent, so silent I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. Arthur Harlow led me into a room he called the study. It was lined with books that looked like they had never been read. A fire crackled in a giant fireplace. He sat in a large, leather chair, gesturing for me to sit in the smaller one opposite him. I felt like a child. "Your mother," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "was my greatest disappointment." The words were like a physical blow. They were so cold, so final. She fell in love with a man I did not approve of, a dreamer, a man with no ambition, no family, no future. I forbade her from seeing him. She defied me. She chose him. So I told her if she walked out that door, she was no longer my daughter. He said it all with a calm, matter-of-fact tone, as if he were reading from a business report. There was no sadness in his eyes, no regret, only a cold, hard judgment. "I heard she struggled, I heard she died, and I heard she left a daughter." His eyes scanned me from head to toe, taking in my worn-out shoes, my second-hand jeans, the coffee stain on my shirt. Living in poverty, a Harlow begging for scraps. The shame I had felt at the coffee shop was nothing compared to this. This was a deep, cutting humiliation. "I could not have my bloodline wallowing in the gutter. It's bad for the family name," he said, as if I were a piece of corporate PR that needed managing. "You will stay here. You will be cleaned up. You will learn to behave in a manner befitting this family. You will not speak of your past. Is that understood?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. He didn't want a granddaughter. He wanted to fix a problem. He wanted to erase my mother's mistake and replace it with a polished, obedient doll. I was given a room. It was bigger than my entire apartment had been. A walk-in closet was filled with new, expensive clothes. An ensuite bathroom had towels so fluffy I could get lost in them. But the window looked out over the manicured lawn, surrounded by a high fence. It was the most beautiful cage I had ever seen. I met the staff, a stern housekeeper, a quiet cook. They were polite but distant. They knew their place, and they knew I was an outsider, an intruder in this perfect world. Days turned into weeks. I was given an allowance. I was enrolled in etiquette lessons. I was told the history of the Harlow Empire, a fortune built on shipping and real estate. My grandfather was a legend in this city, a self-made man who preached about hard work and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He preached hard work, but he had cast out his own daughter for loving a working-class man. He had found me collapsed from hunger, and his solution was to lock me away in a mansion. I tried to talk to him. I tried to tell him about my mom, about how kind she was, how much she loved me. He would just wave a dismissive hand. Sentiment is a weakness, Lena. Your mother was weak. Do not follow in her footsteps. The hope I had felt, the tiny flicker of light that maybe I had found a family, was slowly being smothered. He wasn't saving me. He was imprisoning me, and he was determined to erase every last trace of my mother from my soul. But he had underestimated me. He had found me when I was weak, when I was broken. He didn't realize that surviving on your own, it forges a strength that no amount of money can buy. He thought he was building a new Lena. He had no idea. He was creating his own downfall. The turning point came during one of my grandfather's famous cocktail parties. The house was filled with the city's most powerful people, politicians, business leaders, society figures. I was dressed in a designer gown, my hair styled perfectly. I was the showpiece, the reformed orphan. I was supposed to smile, nod, and look pretty, but I was also listening. I had become an expert at being invisible, at blending into the background and absorbing conversations. My grandfather was holding court in the center of the room, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. A young, ambitious city councilman was praising him. "Your story is so inspiring, Arthur," the councilman gushed. "A true self-made man. You built all of this from nothing. It's the American dream." My grandfather puffed out his chest. "It's simple, really," he said, his voice booming. "Discipline, hard work, no handouts. I never took a single cent from anyone. I believe a person's value is measured by what they build, not what they're given." I felt a hot wave of anger rise in my chest. No handouts. He was given a small loan from his own father to start his first business, a fact I dug up in an old newspaper article in his library. He had built his fortune, yes, but he hadn't started from nothing. And here he was, preaching to a room full of people while his own granddaughter had been collapsing from hunger on the other side of town. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Later that night, after the guests had left, I found him in his study. The courage I felt at the party was fading, replaced by a nervous fear. But I had to say something. "Grandfather," I began, my voice quiet, "what you said tonight about no handouts." He looked up from his ledger, his eyes impatient. "Yes. It's just, you found me because I was starving. If that man hadn't brought me food, if you hadn't brought me here, that was a handout. It saved me." His face hardened. The warmth he had shown his guests was gone, replaced by the familiar ice. "That was not a handout, Lena," he said, his voice dangerously low. "That was an investment. I am investing in the Harlow name. I am correcting a flaw. Do not confuse strategic asset management with charity." An investment, a flaw, asset management. He wasn't just erasing my mother. He was erasing my humanity. I wasn't a person to him. I was a problem to be solved, a broken product to be recalled and refurbished. "My mother wasn't a flaw," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. He stood up, his tall frame looming over me. "She was, and you are a constant reminder of her failure. You have the food in your belly and the roof over your head because of my generosity. You will be grateful and you will be silent. Is that clear?" In that moment, any last shred of hope for a real family died. The cage door had slammed shut. He had shown me his true self. A man so obsessed with his own image, so consumed by his pride, that he saw love as a weakness and his own flesh and blood as a stain on his legacy. I simply nodded, lowering my eyes in a show of submission. "Yes, grandfather, perfectly clear." But inside, the gears were turning. He had built his empire on a myth, the myth of the self-made man, a myth he used to look down on everyone else. My revenge would not be to destroy his wealth. It would be to destroy that myth. I would expose the real Arthur Harlow to the world. The man who started with a loan. The man who let his daughter die in poverty. The man who saw people as assets and flaws. He valued his reputation above all else. So that is what I would take from him. The next phase of my life began in secret. I became two people. On the surface, I was the perfect, grateful granddaughter. I attended my lessons. I wore the clothes. I smiled at his parties. I was quiet, obedient, and utterly forgettable. But beneath the surface, I was a ghost in his machine. I was a hunter gathering my weapons. My weapon of choice, the truth. I started in his own library. While he thought I was reading classic literature, I was poring over old business journals, society pages, and biographies of the city's founding families. I found the story about his father's loan. I found pictures of his own wedding, a lavish affair paid for by his family. The self-made narrative began to crack. But I needed more. I needed something current, something that showed his present-day hypocrisy. I started paying more attention to his business. I'd listen when he took calls in his study, the door slightly ajar. I'd casually ask his driver where he had gone for meetings. I learned he was in the final stages of a huge, city-backed project called the Renaissance Tower. It was going to be his crowning achievement, a monument to his legacy. The mayor was involved. The press was following it closely. He was giving speeches about how it would create jobs and revitalize the community. But in hushed phone calls, I heard him talking about cutting corners, about pushing out a small, family-owned business that had been on the site for generations, about using cheaper, imported materials while promising the city he would buy local. It was all a lie. The community hero was just a greedy businessman. I couldn't prove it, though. I needed evidence, and that meant I had to get into his office downtown. As his granddaughter, I could visit. I started bringing him lunch, using the excuse that I wanted to learn about the business. His executive assistant, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, was always wary of me. But I was persistent. I brought her coffee. I asked about her grandchildren. I became a familiar, harmless presence. I learned that Ms. Davies took a 20-minute walk every day at 3:00 p.m. sharp. And my grandfather had a standing conference call from 3:00 to 3:30. It was a tiny window, but it was all I needed. The day I decided to act, my hands were ice cold. I walked into the executive suite at 2:58 p.m., holding a paper bag from his favorite deli. "Lunch for Mr. Harlow," I said brightly to Ms. Davies. "Oh, you're sweet, Lena," she said, putting on her coat. "I'm just heading out. You can leave it on his desk. He's on a call, so don't disturb him." "I won't," I promised. The moment the elevator doors closed behind her, I moved. I slipped behind her desk. Her computer was unlocked. My heart was a drum in my chest. I could hear my grandfather's muffled voice through his office door. I searched her files. I looked for the Renaissance Tower folder. I found it, but it was password protected. I tried a few obvious passwords, his birthday, the company name, but nothing worked. Time was running out. I was about to give up when I saw it. A sticky note stuck to the bottom of her monitor, a string of numbers and letters. It looked random, but I typed it in. The folder opened. Inside were emails, dozens of them, between my grandfather, the project manager, and the city councilman I'd met at the party. They discussed the relocation of the family business, a forced eviction. They talked about the substandard materials. They even discussed a consulting fee for the councilman to smooth over the permits. It was all there, the proof, the undeniable truth. I pulled the small, hidden USB drive from my bracelet and inserted it. The file transfer bar popped up, crawling slowly. Every second felt like an hour. 15%, 30%, 50%. Suddenly, I heard my grandfather's office door open. My blood ran cold. The transfer was only at 70%. I quickly pulled the USB drive out, closed the folders, and stood up, just as he walked out. He looked at me, then at the lunch bag on his desk. "What are you doing?" I was just leaving your lunch," I stammered, hoping my face wasn't as pale as it felt. He grunted. Well, don't linger. I have work to do. I nodded and practically ran out of the office. I had gotten away with it, and I had gotten enough. I had the emails about the family business. I had the proof of his hypocrisy. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the perfect moment to spring it. The perfect moment arrived a month later. The topping out ceremony for the Renaissance Tower. It was a massive media event. The final beam was being put in place, and the city was celebrating. My grandfather was the guest of honor. There were speeches, a band, and hundreds of people, including the mayor and all the local news stations. He was beaming, shaking hands, posing for photos in front of the giant skeleton of the building. This was his victory lap, the pinnacle of his career. I stood off to the side, watching it all. I was dressed in another expensive outfit, playing my part. But in my small clutch purse, I carried the USB drive, and on that drive was a file I had prepared. A simple PDF document, a letter. The mayor was at the podium, singing my grandfather's praises. Arthur Harlow represents the best of our city, a true self-made success story, a man of integrity who gives back to his community. The crowd applauded. My grandfather smiled, a picture of humble pride. This was it. This was the stage he had built for himself. I didn't need to hack a screen or cause a scene. My revenge would be quieter, more elegant, more devastating. I walked up to the press section. I found a young, hungry-looking reporter from an online news outlet. She was standing away from the main crowd, looking slightly frustrated. I approached her. "You look like someone who appreciates a real story," I said quietly. She looked at me suspicious. "Who are you?" "I'm Arthur Harlow's granddaughter." I handed her the USB drive. "On this drive, you'll find a story about where he really started and what he's really doing to this community. The password to open the file is Aliner, my mother's name." Her eyes widened. She took the drive, her journalist instincts kicking in. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because the city deserves to know the truth about their hero," I said, "and my mother deserves to have her name remembered." I turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd. I didn't need to see the chaos. I knew it would come. The speeches ended. The party continued. My grandfather was surrounded by well-wishers. He looked over at me and gave me a rare, genuine smile. He thought I was finally part of his world. He thought he had won. He had no idea that his legacy was already unraveling. The story broke online 2 hours later. The headline was brutal. The Harlow myth, how a self-made man built an empire on a lie and broken promises. It had everything. The proof of his father's loan, the emails about forcing out the family business, the evidence of the cheap materials, and most damning of all, the story of his daughter, Aliner, my mother, whom he had disowned and left to die in poverty. It was a media firestorm. By that evening, it was the lead story on every local news channel. The narrative flipped overnight. The hero became the villain. The city felt betrayed. The mayor distanced himself. The city council launched an investigation into the Renaissance Tower permits. The family business he tried to push out gave emotional interviews, and the public rallied behind them. I watched it all from my gilded cage. I watched my grandfather's face on the television as the news played. The confidence drained away, replaced by a shocked, ashen horror. He was being exposed as a fraud, the one thing he couldn't bear. He turned off the TV and looked at me. The silence in the room was heavier than ever. "You," he finally said, his voice a broken whisper. "It was you." I didn't deny it. I just looked at him, my expression calm. "Why?" he asked, sounding genuinely confused. "I gave you everything." "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "You tried to give me everything except the truth. You tried to buy my silence about my mother. You tried to make me ashamed of where I came from. But I'm not ashamed. I survived. That makes me stronger than you could ever be." He had no words. The great Arthur Harlow, the man of power and prestige, was left completely speechless. He had been destroyed, not by a business rival, but by the truth. The truth he had spent a lifetime running from. I didn't stay in the mansion that night. I packed a single bag, just my old clothes and my mother's photo. I walked out the way I had come in. This time, no one stopped me. I used the small amount of money I had saved from my allowance to rent a tiny, clean apartment. It had a window that looked out at other apartments, and to me, it was freedom. The fallout continued. The investigation into the Renaissance Tower uncovered more problems. The project was delayed indefinitely. The Harlow Corporation's stock price plummeted. My grandfather resigned as chairman in disgrace. The empire he built was still standing, but its foundation, his reputation, was shattered. I started my life over, for real this time. I got a job at a different cafe. I went to community college at night. I was building my own future with my own two hands. A few months later, a package arrived at my apartment. It was from my grandfather's lawyer. Inside, there was no note, just a single, simple key and an address. I went to the address. It was a small, charming bookstore in a quaint neighborhood, the same family business he had tried to destroy. The key fit the lock. Confused, I called the lawyer. Mr. Harlow purchased the property and cleared its debt, the lawyer explained, his voice neutral. The title is in your name, he said. He said it was the least he could do for a liener. I stood inside the quiet, empty bookstore, the smell of old paper filling the air. It wasn't an apology. It would never be enough to erase the pain. But it was an acknowledgement, a first, fragile step. I didn't get my grandfather back. The man I'd hoped for never really existed. But I got something else. I got my self-respect back. I got my mother's memory back. And I got a future that I controlled. The lesson I learned wasn't about the sweetness of revenge. It was about the power of truth. My grandfather spent his life building a magnificent castle on a lie, and all it took was one honest girl to bring the walls tumbling down. Your name isn't about your wealth or your family. It's about your character. It's about how you treat people when you have power over them, and it's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. I thought the name on that paper bag was my salvation, but it was just a label. The person I am today, that's the real thing I built, and I built it myself.